From Deloitte Tax, welcome to the Tax News and Views podcast. In this series, we talk to specialists from Deloitte about the latest business issues. I'm Carrie Falkenhayn, your host for Tax News and Views, and today we're recording a special tax policy edition to discuss what we might expect in the early days of the second Trump administration. Joining me today are my frequent guests on tax policy topics, John Traub and Anna Taylor from Deloitte's Tax Policy Group. Anna, I'm going to start with you, and we have so much to cover, including some of the executive orders President Trump issued on his first day in office. But let's start with a reminder that given all of the provisions of the tax code that are set to expire at the end of this year, 2025 is being called the Super Bowl of tax. So what will you be watching for in the weeks ahead? Should we expect hearings and markups in the House and Senate?
Well, they plan to use a process called budget reconciliation, which will allow them to sidestep the filibuster and pass it with a simple majority in the Senate. It's a really useful tool because they don't have to worry about finding 60 votes. This means they'll need to first move a budget resolution through both the House and the Senate before the legislation can actually start moving through the various committees. And after that, we'll see the committees put together a package of policies that's consistent with the top line instructions that were laid out in that budget resolution, which started the process. They've set a really ambitious timeline here. The speaker says that he would like to be done by Memorial Day.
Do you think Memorial Day is a realistic timeline? Can they actually do it?
It's possible, but it's going to be really tough. If they do one big bill that includes both taxes and other policy priorities like immigration and energy, it's going to be a really complex piece of legislation with a lot of moving pieces. Not only are they going to have to hammer out agreements between the House, the Senate, and the administration on all of the policies that are going to be included, but they're also going to have to vet those policies for compliance with the budget reconciliation rules, which is not a simple process. It's going to take a lot of time. The best case example for timing on a reconciliation bill in recent history was probably the American Rescue Plan in 2021. It got over the finish line in mid-March. Now, TCJA in 2017 took an entire year. And in 2021 and 2022, when the Democrats were working on the Inflation Reduction Act, that process ultimately took more than a year. So Memorial Day seems pretty ambitious.
John, Anna mentioned one big bill with both tax and spending priorities. Is it possible we end up with a different process where they break it apart and do spending first and then taxes second?
Yeah, the House and Senate are in kind of an unusual stance here where they seem to have different opinions on how to proceed. The Senate leadership has been advocating a two-bill strategy. They've said, we need to get some early wins to President Trump, and we know we want to act quickly on three things: border security, enhancing our military, and facilitating energy permitting to facilitate more oil and gas exploration and production. In their mind, taxes are super important, but just more complex and more work needs to be done there around issues like overall cost, how to balance competing issues on the SALT cap, et cetera. And so they're advocating a two-bill strategy in the Senate. The House Republicans, for the most part, I say for the most part because there's internal disagreement among Republicans as well, but House leadership and Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith say, let's just do one bill. It's very hard to do two bills in a single year. On reconciliation, it has happened most recently in 1986, which is not exactly recent history for most of us. The concern is in most recent years, when Congress has tried to do two bills in a year, invariably the first bill gets done, the second bill gets kicked into a subsequent calendar year, or it doesn't get done at all. And given the stakes of what will happen if we don't address the expired pieces of TCJA, they are very much concerned about the idea of splitting multiple bills. Again, there's a faction of House Republicans that like to support the two-bill strategy, but leadership wants a one-bill strategy. The hard part, though, is to get the process started, you need to have a budget resolution that gives targets for revenues and spending to various House committees. And it's really hard to draft up a budget resolution until you know whether you're drafting a resolution to accommodate everything all at once or just pieces of a bigger package. And that, the longer it takes to get that settled, the sort of the more delay we put into the process.
Regardless of one bill or two bills, this sounds like a potentially pretty expensive undertaking, Anna. Do we have a sense yet as to whether the price tag is going to be a challenge, and how might they deal with the cost?
Yeah, the cost is going to be a huge challenge. They want to do all of these policies, but they also care about the impact the policies are going to have on an already difficult long-term budget outlook. There are a number of ways to approach the cost, and at least at this point, all really seem to be on the table. They can cut spending in other places, they can raise additional revenues, or they can shrink the ambition of the package by doing fewer policies or doing their policies for a shorter duration. I think they're considering all of these options right now. And at the end of the day, it's really a math problem that they're going to have to figure out.
John, I think I heard Anna say they might look to include revenue-raising proposals to offset some of the deficit impact. What might that look like?
Well, it's too soon to say for sure what we will see them used as potential revenue-raising proposals to offset the cost of other items in the package. But there are a number of ways we've heard discussed to raise revenue, mostly through broadening the corporate tax base, that would help offset the cost of other tax provisions in the bill. And so, in many ways, this is an exercise in defense for corporate taxpayers that items we're looking at a limitation of some kind on corporate SALT deductions, an expansion of 162M, increase in the excise tax rate on stock buybacks, taxation of university endowments, clawing back clean energy credits from the Inflation Reduction Act. All of those are things we've heard discussion about at some level or another. And look, not all of them will get done, but they will all be closely looked at. There was a document, Anna, we should talk about, that was leaked from the House Budget Committee last week that cited some, but not all of these. It had actually a very, very long list of ways to both raise revenue, to cut spending, and in some cases to increase spending or decrease revenue. It was an enormous 51-page menu of options that was released by the staff of House Budget Committee Chairman Jody Arrington. We view that document as both under-inclusive and over-inclusive. We think there are things in there which have zero chance of actually becoming law. And there are items on there that are not on there we think are going to get serious discussion. For example, the excise tax rate on stock buybacks is not in that document, but we do think that is something to keep an eye on. On the other hand, the document proposed, for example, taxing credit unions like banks. I don't think that has a real chance of becoming law. So that document is instructive and interesting, but it isn't really a particularly descriptive list of what we actually feel get signed into law.
Okay, let's talk about some of the day one executive orders. What do we see there, John?
Well, Carrie, some of that's what we expected to see. First of all, President Trump issued a regulatory freeze, which is pretty standard. He said to agencies, pens down, if you're working on regulations or guidances, don't put them out until our teams get in place and have a chance to look at them and see if those policies are consistent with our interpretation of the law. That's been pretty standard in prior administrations. He also called for a hiring freeze across the government, with exceptions for defense, public safety, et cetera. And there's special additional rules that extend the IRS hiring freeze longer than that for other agencies. And that was sort of interesting, something we will have to see how quickly that unfreezes, given some of the challenges that the federal agencies face in administering a variety of federal programs, including the tax filing season, which is currently opening.
He also had some executive orders focused on international tax. Isn't that right?
Here, Carrie, two in particular stand out to me. In a long order otherwise devoted to trade issues, he specifically called for Treasury to, quote, investigate whether any foreign country subjects U.S. citizens or corporations to discriminatory or extraterritorial taxes pursuant to Section 891, end quote, of the tax code. What's interesting here is that 891 has been on the books for a long time, but it's never been used. For those not familiar with 891, it authorizes the U.S. to double the rate of tax applied to individuals and businesses domiciled in jurisdictions that are found to have discriminated against American taxpayers. It's always been viewed as a sledgehammer of an approach that would be really a massive retaliation to something other jurisdictions are doing. But the fact President Trump is raising it here has suggested that he intends to use all the tools at his disposal to prevent other countries from collecting revenues from U.S. firms under either Pillar 1 or Pillar 2 of the OECD project.
But there was also a specific executive order on the OECD as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, there's a separate EO that made clear the president's view that the OECD global tax deal inappropriately allows extraterritorial jurisdiction over American firms and limits our ability to enact tax policies that serve our interests. So it's not clear, to me, what actual force and effect this order has, but it does direct Treasury to notify the OECD that, quote, any commitments made by the prior administration on behalf of the U.S. with respect to the global tax deal have no force or effect within the United States. It also directs Treasury to determine if any nation is, quote, out of compliance with any tax treaty with the U.S. or have any tax rules in place or are likely to put tax rules in place that are extraterritorial or disproportionately affect American companies. And it directs to develop policy options to address that, if that's the case. Now, again, it's unclear what legal effect this actually has, but I think it very much puts the world on notice that if it proceeds in attempting to apply OECD-type rules to U.S. entities, they can expect to be met with retaliation and potentially substantial retaliation.
Well, you've given us a lot to digest, and it sounds like we should plan to talk again soon as the process starts to unfold. Thank you both, and I look forward to doing this again in the weeks ahead. If our audience would like more information, you can subscribe to the email version of Tax News and Views. Just go to Deloitte.com and search for that. You also can connect with John and Anna directly via LinkedIn. We hope you tune in here for future tax policy editions as well. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening in. I hope everyone continues to be well. Take care.